My name is Jessie Adair. I'm 34 years old and I read numbers for a living. Last August, I opened my credit card statement and found $68,000 in charges I never made. My sister's entire Cabo wedding, resort, catering, flowers, photographer, the dress, billed to my account over 11 months without a single word to me. I didn't confront her. I opened a spreadsheet. 3 months later, at Thanksgiving, she stood up in front of 50 people and announced, "Jessie's paying for all of it." My mother dropped a document in front of my plate. "Sign it or get out of my house." 50 people watched. I set my fork down and said one sentence. My sister laughed. 3 weeks later, she called me 200 times. I picked up none. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what happened. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, the second of 2 daughters. Dana was 3 years older. She was the one who cried easily, dreamed loudly, and needed more of everything. More patience, more money, more reassurance. My mother gave it to her. She gave it to her the way you give water to the plant you're worried about, which means the other plant sometimes goes without. I was the other plant. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it explains why things went as far as they did. When you grow up being told you're the strong one, you learn to interpret that as a compliment. You carry more because carrying more is your identity. You don't question it until the weight gets heavy enough to crack something. My mother had a photo of Dana's prom night on the dresser in her bedroom. Pink dress, corsage, the full thing. I walked past it for years without thinking much about it. Then one day I noticed there were no photos of me anywhere in that room. Not from prom. Not from my college graduation. Not from the day I passed my CPA exam. I was 31 when I noticed that. I stood in the doorway of her bedroom and looked at that dresser for a long moment. Then I went back downstairs and helped clear the dishes. That's the kind of person I was. I put myself through school. Community college first, then university, working part-time the whole way through. No one co-signed a loan for me. No one showed up on move-in day with a truck. I was 19 the first time I filed my own taxes, and 23 the first time I paid someone else's. That someone was my mother. $600 a month, starting in 2018 for 4 years. She called it helping out with the house. I never called it anything. I just set up the transfer and moved on. Dana lived at home until she was 28 and never paid rent. I know because my mother mentioned it once, casually, as though it was obvious. Dana needs a little more time to get on her feet. I didn't argue. I just nodded and recalculated my monthly budget. Dana got engaged in March of 2023. His name was Colin Whitfield, an engineer, solid, quiet, the kind of man who seemed genuinely decent in the way that made you hope he knew what he was walking into. They were planning a wedding in Cabo San Lucas. 85 guests. It was a lot, more than I would have chosen, but it wasn't my wedding. I sent her a congratulations text and a candle set from a boutique in Charlotte. I thought that was my role in this. The supportive sister who shows up and claps. 2 weeks after the engagement, Dana messaged me. "Hey, can I grab your card info real quick? Just to book Mom's flight. I'll pay you back before the statement hits. Promise." I sent it without thinking. We'd done this before. Split a trip in 2022, a long weekend to Asheville. She'd paid me back that time within the week. I didn't think twice. I should have thought twice. August came. I do this every month. Sit down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and go through my statements. It's not anxiety. It's just how I'm wired. I've reviewed thousands of financial documents in my career, and the habit bled into my personal life years ago. I check everything. It takes maybe 20 minutes. That Tuesday, it took a lot longer than 20 minutes. The first line that stopped me was a charge from something called Cabo Azure Resort. $14,200, dated the previous September. I set my coffee down. I scrolled. Florentine events, $6,800. I opened a new tab, Googled it. Wedding and event florist, Cabo San Lucas. I stared at that for about 30 seconds. Then I kept scrolling. A catering company, $22,500. A photography studio based in Austin, $8,500 for a single weekend package. A rehearsal dinner venue, $4,200. A boutique in Charlotte, not Cabo, Charlotte, the city where I live. $3,400 in alterations and accessories. I pulled up 11 months of statements, 23 transactions, $68,000. My sister's entire destination wedding, charged to my card, not my authorization, not my signature. My number, the one I'd sent her in a text message to book a flight, used over and over across an entire year, as though it belonged to her. I sat at that table for a long time without moving. In my line of work, when you find a discrepancy, you don't react. You document. You pull the thread carefully because the first thing you find is almost never the whole picture. I opened a new spreadsheet. I named it Adair_wedding_charges_audit.xlsx. I don't know exactly why I included my own last name. Maybe because I needed to remind myself this was a case, not a family matter, a case. I listed every transaction. Vendor name, date, amount, category, notes. I left the last column blank. I called it action. I didn't fill it in yet, but I knew what was going in there. I just needed to choose the right time. I didn't call Dana. I didn't call my mother. I didn't send a single message. I called my bank. The fraud specialist I spoke with was calm and thorough. She walked me through the dispute process. I told her I wasn't ready to open it yet. I needed 30 more days to compile documentation. She paused, then said she'd note it on the account. She asked if the card had been physically stolen. I said no. I said the number had been shared voluntarily for a single purchase, and then used without authorization for 11 months. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, I understand. Take the time you need. We'll be here. Over the next few weeks, I expanded the audit. In my profession, we call it scope expansion. When you find one irregularity, you go back further. You don't assume the problem started where you first noticed it. I pulled 4 years of statements. In April of 2022, there was a charge from a spa in Asheville, $1,800, a card I'd stopped using after it expired. The charge had gone through on a grace period. I hadn't caught it at the time because I'd already moved on to a new account. Then I found the insurance. June 2020. Dana had sent me a message asking if she could temporarily use my card details to cover her car insurance. Her new card hadn't arrived yet. Shouldn't be more than 2 months, she'd written. I found the original text thread. Those exact words. Shouldn't be more than 2 months. The charges continued for 8 months after she said that. $340 a month. I'd never noticed because they were buried in a long statement, and the amount didn't spike enough to catch my eye. I added it all up. $68,000 from the wedding, $2,700 from the insurance, $1,800 from the spa. A handful of smaller things I'd written off at the time as errors that corrected themselves. Nearly $72,000 in total. Across 4 years, I sat with that number for a while. I wrote it on a piece of paper by hand and taped it to the refrigerator. Not out of anger, just so I'd stop second-guessing myself. Then I made an appointment with a lawyer. Gregory Falk had a small office in Midtown Charlotte. Civil litigation with experience in financial disputes and unauthorized credit use. The consultation was $350 for 45 minutes. He looked at my folder, 47 pages, tabbed and indexed, and said, "You've done half my job already." I told him I was a CPA. He nodded like that explained everything. It did. He confirmed what I suspected. Unauthorized use of a credit account, clear documentation, strong grounds for a civil claim. If Dana denied the charges or refused to engage, the bank dispute alone would create significant legal exposure for her. He advised me to stay quiet, keep documenting, and wait for the right moment to make the dispute formal. "Has anyone in the family been told you're doing this?" he asked. "No," I said. He nodded once. "Keep it that way." I left his office with his card in my wallet and a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. Measured. That was the word that kept coming to me. Measured but unambiguous. I liked that. It was exactly how I intended to handle everything that came next. Meanwhile, Dana kept texting me. She sent photos of the centerpiece options. She asked my opinion on the bridesmaid dress color, dusty rose versus sage. She forwarded a screenshot of the resort's ocean view with 3 exclamation points. I replied to each one. Short, warm, normal. I said the centerpieces were beautiful. I said either color would work. I said the view looked incredible. I meant none of it as cruelty. I just needed her to keep moving normally until the right moment arrived. In October, my mother called, not to check in, not to ask how I was. She called to tell me that Thanksgiving would be at her house this year and that I should come early because Dana had something to share with the family. Of course, I said. I'll be there. I arrived at my mother's house in Greensboro the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. The drive was 2 hours. I brought a bottle of wine I didn't open and a dish I'd made myself because that's what I always did. There was a chalkboard near the fireplace that hadn't been there the last time I visited. It said Dana and Colin, 214 days in white chalk, surrounded by small drawn hearts. I looked at it once, took note of it, and set my dish in the kitchen. By Thursday afternoon, the house was full. 50 people, roughly, aunts, cousins, a few of Colin's relatives, neighbors who'd been coming to these dinners for years. My mother's house smelled like it always did on Thanksgiving, butter and something sweet in the oven. The table was set with the good china. Dana was wearing a cream-colored wrap dress. She looked radiant. She was laughing at something Colin had said when I walked past, and she gave me a hug that felt completely normal, which at the time was still startling to me, even after 3 months of her having no idea what I knew. Colin didn't quite meet my eyes. When we said hello, he looked somewhere past my shoulder. It was quick. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I noticed. We sat down to eat. Everything was ordinary until my mother stood up before the main course was served. She said she wanted to share something wonderful before we dug in. Dana stood up next, and I understood immediately that this was choreographed. They had planned the order of this. My mother's introduction, then Dana's announcement, then the moment when all eyes would be on me. Dana talked about the wedding, about Cabo, about the vendors, about how excited she and Colin were to celebrate surrounded by everyone they loved. She talked about family and sacrifice and how lucky she was. She was good at it. She always had been, the kind of person who could hold a room just by feeling comfortable in it. Then she looked at me. And I just want to say, she said, that my sister Jessie has been so incredible through all of this. She's agreed to cover the costs. She's the only one who's really in a position to. And she wanted to do this for us, for our family. People turned to look at me. Someone started clapping. My aunt smiled. A cousin raised a glass. I didn't correct her, not yet. I held my expression steady and gave a small nod, the kind that could mean anything. I'd been practicing expressions like that for 34 years. Then my mother sat down, but not before picking up a folded piece of paper from the chair beside her and walking it over to me. She placed it in front of my plate. A pen appeared beside it. The document was printed cleanly, titled in plain font at the top, Family Contribution Agreement. It outlined my commitment to assume financial responsibility for all wedding-related expenses charged to my credit account, and confirmed that no dispute or claim would be pursued. My mother leaned down and said quietly enough that only the people immediately around us could hear, "Sign it, Jessie. You know it's the right thing to do." And then, louder, to the table, "Sign it, or get out." The room shifted. Some people looked down at their plates. Some kept watching. No one intervened. My Aunt Carol, sitting 2 seats away, looked at the tablecloth. Dana was smiling, patient, certain. I looked at the document. I read it, the whole thing, every paragraph, which took maybe 90 seconds. No one spoke during those 90 seconds. Then I put the pen down. I set my fork on the table beside my plate. I looked at Dana first, then at my mother. I said, "I've already spoken to my bank and my attorney. The charges are under dispute. You'll hear from them before the wedding." The table went very quiet. Dana laughed, not a nervous laugh, a real one. The kind you produce when you're certain someone is bluffing, when you've known them your whole life and you've watched them yield 100 times before, and you expect the 101st to be no different. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. I thanked my mother for the dinner. I walked out. I sat in my car in the driveway for 4 minutes. My hands were on the wheel. I wasn't shaking. Then I called the bank. "I'm ready to open the dispute now," I said. "I'll start the process immediately," the specialist said. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. I drove back to Charlotte that night. I was home by 10. The next morning, Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and sent the bank the documentation package I'd been building for 3 months. 47 pages, tabbed, indexed, every transaction cross-referenced against vendor websites and my own geolocation history, which confirmed I had never been in Cabo San Lucas at any point during the billing period. The subject line was Unauthorized Transaction Documentation, Account 4419, Formal Dispute Request. I hit send at 8:14 in the morning. The auto reply came back in 3 minutes. I refilled my coffee. By Friday afternoon, I had a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. I looked it up. It was Cabo Azure Resort. They had called Dana's phone first. Then, finding my address listed as the billing contact on the original contract, they called me as well. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already knew what the call was about. The resort had flagged the $14,200 deposit as under dispute and had reached out to the cardholder, which was me, to confirm authorization. Since I had initiated the dispute, there was nothing to confirm. The hold on the deposit was now in question. They needed a response from the billing cardholder within 5 business days, or the reservation would be released. Dana messaged me that evening. "What did you do? Call the bank and tell them it was a mistake. Right now." I didn't reply. Saturday, the catering company sent an email requesting written authorization from the cardholder for the $22,500 contract. If documentation wasn't provided within 7 business days, the contract would be suspended pending resolution of the billing dispute. Sunday, my mother called. I answered this time because I wanted to hear what she would say. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what had happened. She told me I was being selfish. She told me I was vindictive. She said I was doing this to punish Dana for being happy, which was something she said with such conviction that I understood she had rehearsed it, or at least repeated it to herself enough times that it had become true in her version of events. I let her finish. Then I said, "Mom, I didn't plan this wedding. I didn't authorize these charges. That's all I have to say." I hung up. I looked at the clock. It was 9:47 p.m. I looked at my phone. Dana had called 14 times that day. I turned the notifications off, put the phone face down on the counter, and went to bed. It was around this time that I went back further than the wedding. I'm a CPA. Scope expansion isn't something I decide to do. It's something I do automatically when I find an anomaly. The question is never, did this happen here? It's how far back does this go? I told you about the spa charge in 2022. I told you about the insurance. What I didn't tell you yet is what those numbers meant when I put them together. $68,000 from the wedding, $2,720 from the insurance, $1,800 from the spa. Other smaller things I'd dismissed over the years. A charge here, and I'll get you back there, that never resolved into an actual payment. I wrote the final number on a piece of paper by hand, $78,420, in 4 years. I taped it to my refrigerator, not to feel sorry for myself, just to stop doubting what I knew. The thing that took the air out of me wasn't the number. Numbers are just numbers. What took the air out was the word that kept coming to mind: casual. There was nothing calculated about what Dana had done. No scheme she'd plotted in a dark room. She had simply used my resources the way you use a household appliance. Because it was there, because it worked, because she had never been taught to question whether it belonged to her. My mother had given her that framework. My silence had reinforced it. I sat with that for a long time. Then, a few days after Thanksgiving, my Aunt Carol emailed me. The subject line just said, "Jessie, I need to talk to you." Carol drove 2 hours to meet me at a coffee shop in Charlotte. She arrived before I did, which surprised me. She was sitting with her hands around a mug she hadn't touched, and when she saw me, she looked like someone who had been waiting to say something for a long time. "I'm not taking sides," she said first. "I want you to know that." "Okay," I said. "But there are things you don't know, and I think you should." She told me that in June, 6 months before Thanksgiving, 6 months before the ambush with the printed document. My mother had told Dana, in Carol's presence, that I would cover the wedding costs. Those were her exact words, as Carol remembered them. "Jessie will handle it. She always does." Dana hadn't decided to use my card on her own. My mother had already promised her it was available. I held my coffee cup and didn't say anything for a moment. Carol also told me that the $600 a month I'd been sending home from 2018 to 2022 hadn't always gone where I thought it went. She'd seen my mother's budget during a period when she was helping Patricia manage some financial paperwork. Some of the money had covered the house, yes, but some of it had gone toward Dana's first apartment deposit, toward a design course Dana had enrolled in and then dropped, toward cash withdrawals Carol couldn't account for. "I don't have documentation," Carol said. "I just saw what I saw." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry it took me this long to say anything." I looked at her. She looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing her more clearly. "Did Dana know where the money came from?" I asked. Carol shook her head slowly. "I don't think she asked." That was the answer. That was the whole thing in 4 words. She hadn't asked, because she'd never had to. I drove back to Charlotte in silence. No music. The highway was empty in that particular way it gets in the evening when you're going against traffic. Just you and the dark and the white dashes disappearing under the car. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was just recalibrating. When I got home, I had 38 missed calls from Dana and 1 from Colin. I called Colin back. He picked up on the second ring. He was at work. I could hear the ambient noise of an office behind him. His voice was careful in a way I hadn't expected. "I don't really know where to start," he said. "That's okay," I said. "Take your time." He told me that when the resort called Dana, she'd told him the call was a billing error, that it would be resolved quickly. He'd believed her, but then the catering company emailed. Then the photographer's office called. And he'd started asking questions that Dana wasn't answering in a way that added up. He asked her directly, "Was this Jessie's card?" She said it was a family account, that I had an arrangement with her. He'd called me because he needed to hear it from me. "There was no arrangement, Colin," I said. "There was no conversation. I gave her my card number to book a flight in 2022. She used it for 11 months without telling me. That's what happened." He was quiet for a long time. I waited. "I didn't know," he said finally. His voice had changed, flatter, heavier. "I genuinely didn't know it was your card." "I believe you," I said, and I did. "Jessie," he said, "I'm sorry." It was the only apology I received from anyone in that family. I didn't make a big deal of it. I just said thank you and let the conversation end. I set the phone down and looked at the wall. 3 months of building a case, 2 hours with a lawyer, 1 sentence at Thanksgiving, and the first "I'm sorry" came from the one person who hadn't done anything to me. I thought about that for a while. The vendor chain collapsed over the following 10 days. The resort released the reservation hold after 5 business days, with no billing resolution. The catering company suspended the contract on day 7. The photographer, and this is the part that still gets me, sent a formal contract suspension notice to Dana and CC'd it to the billing address on file, which was my address. I read the email the same minute she did. "Dear Ms. Whitfield, due to the unresolved billing dispute on the primary account, we are suspending our contract for photography services scheduled for December 14th, 2025. Please contact our office within 48 hours to discuss alternative payment arrangements." I saved it to my folder. I closed the laptop. Dana called the vendors. I know this because 2 of them forwarded her calls to me, and one of them sent me an email explaining that the card holder in a billing dispute takes precedence over the event contact. Dana had told at least one vendor that I was acting out of personal malice, that I was trying to ruin her wedding because I was jealous. One of those vendors forwarded her email to me. I did not respond to it. Then Dana posted in the family group chat. I don't remember the exact wording, but the shape of it was this: "I was jealous. I had never been happy for her. I was using a legal technicality to destroy something she had spent a year building, because I had nothing of my own to celebrate." Several relatives responded. A few agreed. My mother added a heart. I read every reply. I didn't type anything. And then Carol replied. 11 words. "Dana, the charges were unauthorized. I was there when your mother promised Jessie would handle it." The group chat went silent. Not a single reply. Not from Dana, not from my mother, not from the cousins who had agreed 30 seconds earlier. 11 words, and the whole conversation just stopped. I screenshot it and added it to the folder. Then I put my phone down and went to make dinner. 3 days later, I received a letter from a lawyer retained by Dana, demanding that I withdraw the bank dispute within 48 hours, or face legal action for interference with contracted services. I forwarded it to Gregory Falk with a single line, "Please advise." He called me within the hour. He was calm. He said the letter was template intimidation, poorly researched, and that their position was legally untenable given the documentation I'd provided. He recommended we respond formally and proceed with the demand letter we'd already drafted. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said. The demand letter went out on December 12th. Gregory sent it certified mail to Dana and Colin's home address. It outlined the full unauthorized transaction history, referenced the supporting documentation, cited the applicable statutes, and demanded repayment of $72,520 within 30 days. If no response was received, we would proceed with a civil claim. I was at home when the tracking confirmed delivery. 2:17 p.m. I saw the notification and set my phone on the table and made myself lunch. That evening, my mother called. I answered. She didn't ask about the letter. She probably hadn't seen it yet. She called to ask me if I understood what I was doing, if I understood how much this was hurting the family, if I understood what it cost to plan a wedding and how devastating it was to have everything fall apart at the last minute. She called me selfish. She said I had a heart of stone. She said I was doing this to win, not because I was actually hurt. I let her talk. When she finished, I said, "Mom, you handed me a document to sign in front of 50 people. You didn't call me first. You didn't ask. You planned this as a performance, and you expected me to do what I've always done. I'm not doing it anymore, and I don't have anything left to say after this call." I hung up. I looked at the clock. It was 11:04 p.m. I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the bank. The dispute investigation was complete. A temporary credit of $68,000 had been applied to my account pending final resolution. I read the email twice. Then I closed the laptop and drank my coffee before it went cold. Dana called me 200 times between November 29th and December 20th. I know this because I counted it in my call log later. Not obsessively, I just wanted to know the number. 200 calls over 22 days. Some days, 15 in a row. Some days, just one, very late at night, when I assumed she sat in some quiet room somewhere thinking I might pick up if she tried once more at a different hour. I picked up none of them. It wasn't punishment. I want to be clear about that. I didn't leave her calls unanswered to make her feel the specific shape of being ignored. I left them unanswered because I had nothing left to say that a lawyer couldn't say better, and because every conversation I could imagine having with her would have required me to perform emotions I didn't feel anymore, to be either angrier than I was or softer than I could manage, and I was done performing for this family. On December 23rd, Dana's attorney contacted Gregory Falk. They wanted to negotiate. We met in Gregory's office on a Tuesday. Dana and Colin came with their lawyer, a different one this time, an actual civil litigator, not the template letter firm. Dana didn't look at me when they came in. Colin did. He gave me a small nod. I nodded back. Their offer, $52,000, paid in monthly installments of $2,200 over 24 months. No admission of wrongdoing, no formal apology. Gregory asked me privately if I wanted to push for the full amount in court. I thought about it for about 10 seconds. "What I want," I said, "is for this to be over." He understood. We signed the agreement. I walked out of Gregory's office into a cold December afternoon. I checked my phone. Dana had sent one final message. It wasn't an apology. It said, "I hope you're satisfied with what you've done." I read it standing in the parking lot. I read it again. Then I put my phone in my pocket and walked to my car. She wanted me to feel guilty or victorious. Either would have given her something, a reaction, a foothold, something to work with. I felt neither. I just felt finished. I sat in my car for a while. Then I opened my contacts, found Dana's name, and deleted it. Not blocked. Deleted. I found my mother's name and did the same. I opened the family group chat and left it without a message. No announcement, no parting speech, no final word. Just gone. That night I texted Carol. "On my way home." I'm okay, she replied in less than a minute. I'm glad. I didn't go home to Greensboro for Christmas. It was the first year I hadn't, in my entire life. I stayed in Charlotte. I bought ingredients for a pasta I'd been wanting to try and hadn't gotten around to. I watched a film I'd deprioritized every holiday season for 2 years, because there was always somewhere to be, someone to accommodate, something to manage. I went to bed at 11. I slept through the night. It was fine. More than fine. It was quiet in a way that felt new, like a sound I hadn't known was constant, had finally stopped. On December 28th, Carol drove to Charlotte. She brought wine. I made dinner. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd opened that statement in August, where I'd built the audit file, where I'd sent the dispute package at 8:14 in the morning, and we just talked. Not about Dana, not about my mother, about me. She asked about my work, about Charlotte, about what I liked doing on weekends. Not what I was good at. What I liked. I sat with that question for a moment. It had been a while since anyone had asked. We talked until almost midnight. When she left, she hugged me at the door and said, "You're going to be all right, Jessie." "I know," I said. And I meant it. The next morning, I woke up early. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, the way I always do at the beginning of the month, and I opened my credit card statement. Every line was mine. Every charge was something I had chosen. Groceries, utilities, a new coat I'd been putting off buying, dinner with a colleague, a book. Nothing unfamiliar. Nothing I had to trace back to a vendor in a city I'd never been to. I read through the whole statement in about 4 minutes. Then I closed the laptop. I drank my coffee while it was still hot. For the first time in years, I had the time. There's something no one tells you about being the dependable one. It's not that people take advantage of you, not exactly. It's that they stop being able to imagine you any other way. You become load-bearing, the way a wall becomes load-bearing. Not because anyone chose it, but because enough weight was placed on it over enough years that removing it became unthinkable. You're not a person anymore, you're a structural feature. I understood this in pieces over the years, but I understood it completely the week between Christmas and New Year's, sitting in my apartment with no family obligations for the first time in my adult life, when I started going back through things I hadn't let myself look at while I was still in the middle of everything. I found a voicemail from Dana, not a recent one, from March of 2023, the week after she got engaged. I don't know why I still had it. I tend to keep things, occupational habit. She'd called on a Thursday evening, and her voice in that message was warm and genuine in a way that made me sit still for a long time after hearing it. "Jessie, I know I know it's been weird sometimes, but I just wanted to tell you that I'm really happy, and I want you to be part of this, like actually part of it. Not just show up and sit in the third row. I want you involved. Call me back." I played it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the table. I remembered that call. I remembered calling her back the next evening, and she launched immediately into the venue options she was considering. And by the end of the conversation, I was being asked if I knew anyone who did event accounting, because she wanted to keep the budget organized. 45 minutes into the call, I had already become useful rather than included. I hadn't noticed the transition at the time. That voicemail was the last time Dana spoke to me like I was her sister, rather than a resource. I don't think she noticed the transition either. That's the part I kept coming back to in those quiet days after Christmas. Not the malice, because there wasn't much malice in it. There was something almost worse than malice. There was assumption, the deep structural assumption that Jessie handles it. Jessie is fine. Jessie doesn't need to be asked because Jessie already knows the answer is yes. My mother built that assumption. Dana inherited it, and I had reinforced it every single time I said yes without being asked. Every time I absorbed a cost that should have been shared. Every time I accepted the label of strong without questioning what it was actually costing me. I'm not absolving them. I want to be clear about that. What Dana did was not a misunderstanding. Charging $68,000 to someone else's account is not a gray area, regardless of what you've been told about that person's capacity to absorb things. What my mother did at that Thanksgiving table was a deliberate, calculated use of social pressure in front of an audience specifically chosen to make refusal feel impossible. Those were choices. They had consequences. But I also had to sit with my part in the architecture, The years of transferred money with no paperwork. The card number sent in a text without conditions. The 100 small moments where I could have said, actually, this doesn't work for me, and instead said nothing, because saying nothing was easier than watching them adjust their expectations of me, and finding I couldn't bear the discomfort of being seen as less capable than they needed me to be. I'd been participating in my own disappearance for a long time. Recognizing that didn't make me responsible for what they did. It just made the whole thing more expensive to look at, honestly. The first payment came through in February, $2,200, transferred from a joint account belonging to Dana and Colin, hitting my account on the 14th of the month. I got the notification on my phone while I was at my desk at work. I looked at it for a moment. Then I set the phone down and went back to the spreadsheet I'd been working on. I used that first payment to pay off the remaining balance on a small personal loan I'd been carrying since I bought my apartment. It wasn't a large amount, just under $2,000. But it was something I'd been chipping away at for 2 years, something that had always felt like a background weight. I cleared it in one transaction and then sat for a moment looking at the zero balance. I'd planned to feel something more significant than I did. Mostly what I felt was practical. The money was back. Not all of it, not yet. And the bank dispute was still working through its final stages for the charged amounts. But the pipeline was moving in the right direction. I was not going to be left holding a debt I hadn't created. That was the outcome I'd needed. The satisfaction, when it came, was quieter than I expected. Not triumphant, more like the way you feel when a headache finally lifts. Not elation, just the absence of something that had been there so long you'd stopped registering it as pain and had started thinking of it as your baseline. I told Gregory Falk about the first payment. He confirmed receipt on the agreement side and noted the account. Professional, efficient. I thanked him. That was it. No celebration, no call to anyone. I went home that evening, made dinner, and watched the rest of a documentary I'd started the previous week. I was in bed by 10. I kept waiting for the anger to show up. People told me, friends, a couple of colleagues who knew pieces of the situation, that I was going to need to feel it at some point, that you couldn't go through something like this and stay functional without eventually having the moment where it all hits you. Maybe they were right, but the anger, when I looked for it, wasn't where I expected it to be. It wasn't hot. It wasn't the kind that wants to break something or make someone witness your breaking. It was a slow, residual thing, like sediment at the bottom of a glass. Present, visible when I held it up to the light, but settled, not stirred. What I felt more than anger was grief, and that surprised me. I had lunch with a colleague named Beverly around the middle of February. We'd worked together for 6 years. She knew something had happened with my family over the holidays. I'd mentioned needing some days off in December, and she was observant enough to know it was more than a routine thing. She didn't press. Beverly was good at not pressing. We were halfway through lunch when she asked carefully, "Are you actually okay?" Not work okay. Actually. I thought about giving her the practical answer. The dispute was resolved, the payment plan was in place, I was sleeping fine. Instead I said, "I'm grieving, I think," which is strange because nothing died. She nodded like that made complete sense. "Something did though," she said. "The version of the relationship you thought you had." I looked at my plate. That was it exactly. That was the thing I hadn't been able to name until she said it. I had spent 3 months building a case, documenting transactions, consulting lawyers, executing a dispute process with precision and control. I had stayed calm at the Thanksgiving table. I had said 1 sentence and walked out. I had answered 0 of 200 phone calls. I had signed the settlement agreement and removed the contacts and left the group chat, all without a single moment of visible collapse. And all of that, the competence, the control, the execution, had been real. I don't want to undercut it. It was necessary, and I had done it well, and I didn't regret any of it. But underneath the case file, underneath the audit spreadsheet and the indexed folder and the certified demand letter, there had been a sister. A complicated, frustrating, entitled, sometimes warm sister who had left me a voicemail in March of 2023, saying she wanted me actually involved. There had been a mother who, whatever her failures, had made the house smell like butter and something sweet every Thanksgiving for 34 years. There had been a family, imperfect and lopsided and often painful, but mine. And that family, in the form I had known it, was gone. Not because I'd ended it. It had ended itself, through a slow accumulation of choices made by people who believed I would always absorb whatever they put on me. But I was still the one sitting with the absence. I didn't cry at lunch, I didn't cry that evening. But something loosened a little, and I let it. Beverly paid the bill before I could argue and said, "Come over for dinner sometime. Nothing serious. Just food." I said I would, and I meant it. It was Carol who told me in late February that Dana and Colin had changed the wedding. Not canceled, scaled down. They'd moved from Cabo to a small venue outside of Greensboro, 30 guests instead of 85, a catered lunch instead of a destination weekend. Colin's parents had apparently covered most of the remaining vendor costs from their side. The date was the same, the 14th of December, the day the photographer's contract had originally run through. Carol told me this gently, the way you tell someone news you're not sure how they'll receive. I sat with it for a moment. Good, I said. And I meant that too. Not as satisfaction, not as the pleasure of someone watching a consequence land, but as something more honest. 30 guests at a local venue was probably a better wedding than 85 people at a destination resort charged to a stolen credit account. It was probably closer to what they could actually afford and what a marriage actually needs to start on. I hoped Colin was okay. I'd thought about him more than once since December. He had known nothing. He'd shown up to Thanksgiving not understanding the terrain he was walking into. And then the entire scaffolding had collapsed underneath the dinner he thought he was attending. He'd called me, asked a direct question, received a direct answer, and apologized for something that wasn't his fault. That was more than I expected from anyone. I didn't send a gift. I didn't send a card. I wasn't there, but I thought, I hope it's a good day for them. That felt like the right amount of grace, not more, not less. There's a question people ask, sometimes directly, sometimes in the shape of other questions. When they find out what happened, was it worth it? I've turned it over a lot. I understand what they mean by it. They mean, was the damage worth the recovery? Was the fallout worth the principal? Was losing your family worth the $68,000 or the $72,000 or whatever number they're imagining? Here's what I've landed on. The money was never the point. The money was evidence. The money was the form that a 30-year pattern took when it finally became too large to absorb quietly. If Dana had charged $800 without asking, I might have said something and then let it go. If she'd done it once, under pressure, and apologized and paid me back, we might have had a hard conversation and come out the other side. That's not what happened. What happened was a systematic, multi-year treatment of my resources, my money, my credit, my identity as a billing address on vendor contracts, as communal property that didn't require my consent. What happened was my mother standing in front of 50 people and telling me to sign a document that would have legally ratified that treatment and waived my ability to challenge it. What happened was a family operating on the assumption that I would not act, because I had never acted before, because they had trained me and I had trained myself to be a person who handles it. When I acted, the system didn't know what to do. That's not something I'm proud of, exactly. It's something I understand now. The grief is real. The loss is real. I am not going to pretend that walking out of that Thanksgiving table and not looking back was painless, that leaving the group chat felt like freedom without also feeling like amputation. It was both. It was the kind of both that doesn't resolve cleanly, that you carry in different ways depending on the day. But here's the other thing. I sleep. I sleep through the night, which I had not been doing consistently for a long time before all of this. Not since I bought the apartment. Not since the monthly transfers to my mother. Not since Dana's engagement and the slow gathering unease of a situation I could feel but couldn't yet name. I wake up and make coffee and sit at my kitchen table and open my laptop, and the statement is clean and the folder on my desktop labeled Adair _ Wedding _ charges _ audit has been moved to an archive subfolder where I never have to look at it unless I choose to. I'm not starting over, I'm just starting from a more honest position than I had before. Carol came back in March, not for any particular occasion. She just drove down on a Saturday and we walked through a neighborhood near my apartment that she'd never seen. And she told me about a trip she was thinking of taking that summer. Portugal, maybe, or somewhere else she'd been putting off for years, Because there was always something else to attend to. You should go, I said. I think I will, she said. We walked for a while without talking, which is a thing I've always been able to do with her more easily than with most people. The city was doing that thing it does in early March in North Carolina. Not quite warm, but trying. The light changed from what it had been in December. Everything provisional and almost there. Can I ask you something? Carol said. Yes. Do you miss her? I knew she meant Dana. I thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. I miss who I thought she was, I said. I miss the voicemail she left me when she got engaged. I don't think the person in that voicemail was ever entirely real, but I still miss her. Carol nodded. That's allowed, she said. I know. We walked back to my apartment and I made us lunch and she stayed until late afternoon. When she left, she hugged me at the door the same way she had in December, and I felt the same thing I'd felt then. The specific warmth of being seen by someone who isn't obligated to see you, who just does. I watched her car pull away from the window, then I went back inside, washed the dishes, and sat at my kitchen table with the last of the coffee. The afternoon light came through the window at the angle it only gets in March, long and sideways, the kind that makes ordinary things look briefly significant. The coffee cup, the grain of the wood, the clean counter, the quiet. I sat there for a while. I wasn't waiting for anything. That was new too.